to the Asher Marketing Podcast. I'm Anthony Giuliano, and my guest this week is Steven Salcedo. Steven, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am great. Thanks for joining us. I know this is a busy time of year for you because by the time this comes out, you will have put together your famous holiday playlist.
That is correct. That is right.
So tell us about the origin of that. How'd you get started doing that, and what's on the docket for this year's playlist?
Yeah, it's funny. I can answer the first one in depth, and I guess by the time this comes out, it'll already be out. But it really started as a last minute thing. It wasn't really planned.
Yeah,
this is my 10th year this year.
Okay.
And so 10 years ago, I was at Vera Bradley, and I mean this is retail, so it's the busiest time of the year.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
And so everybody's working really hard and just pulling late nights and just trying to get ready for Black Friday. I was on the e-commerce team at the time, and so I had a digital e-commerce team. So they're doing emails, websites, social media, copywriting, just all of this stuff. And that's just for web.
Yeah.
And, everybody's just working really hard. I'm like, gosh, what can we do just to keep spirits going? No pun intended.
Yeah, but keep spirits bright.
Just keep everybody motivated.
Yeah.
I was at home one night, and I listen to a lot of music anyway, right? And so I was going through like all these holiday MP3s that I had, lots of old obscure like R&B, like stacks and stuff they don't play on the radio ever.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, this stuff is great. I wish people can hear this. And I'm like, you know what?
They can.
I'm gonna do a holiday mix. And so I had, that CDRs laying around.
Yeah.
Designed up a quick cover. I threw like 20 tracks on a CD, and I left it on everybody's desk of my team.
Okay.
And it was pretty well received.
Yeah.
And then, the next year it's like, hey, you going to do another one of those things? One of those mixtapes? I'm like, yeah, sure. So it became like a kind of an obligation, tradition type of thing.
So do you try to not duplicate songs? Is it a new list every year? All right.
I've not duplicated a song, and that's I don't intend to.
All right.
And I even get really detailed into like, well, I had that artist last year, so I can't have that artist this year either.
Okay. All right.
And where it's evolved to is for the last 5 or 6 of them, all of the music comes from records from my vinyl collection. So I'm not just downloading stuff off Spotify or YouTube or anything like that. Like all year, I'll be finding records, online, wherever, getting those, digitizing those, and you put them all together, and eventually it makes a mix.
All right. That sounds like something to look forward to. And it reminds me, so Podcast Nick, Steve, remind me that when we get to the speed round, I want to come back to that with a question for you. If I forget, try to remind me, and I'll try to remember, because we're going to come back to that. But we're not here to talk about the Christmas playlist. We're here to talk about your career, the organization you work for. So, Steve, tell us a little bit about growing up in Merrillville and what you were thinking about career-wise and what you did with that, because you had an interesting college major. Was it graphic arts for journalism?
Journalism, graphics.
Yeah. So tell us how you got into that field and what you decided to do from there.
Yeah, I would say that my career path started long before my career did, and even into high school. I was always creating stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't play sports, I didn't sing in the choir, I don't know how to play an instrument. And so when I look back, I think creating content was my way of expressing and standing out in my sort of own competitive, sport, whatever you want to call it. So I was always writing stories and, drawing stuff and making mixtapes, and recording records and doing all this stuff.
Yeah.
Then when I got into high school, they had just finished a big expansion of Maryville High School, and they had installed a TV studio. So I got involved in that. We did a weekly 10-minute news program every Friday, like in the school, and just really started getting into broadcasting. By my senior year, I was the producer of that show, which means I was kind of leading, the show and then all the people who worked on it. So it was kind of like some early soft management, team building type skills.
Sure.
But learning cameras and switchboards and editing and teleprompters and lighting and all that fun stuff. So from there, I'm like, all right, I want to get into telecommunications. So, come college, I went to Ball State, majored in TCOM. And, once I got there, it was weird because, I knew I was in college for education, but you also want to do your social college thing.
Yeah, sure.
And man, these people who were in TCOM, they were really competitive. They lived at that TV studio.
Oh, really?
Like that's all they did.
Okay.
And I'm like, man, I don't want to do that kind of commitment. And then what I started to realize is that even even after you would graduate, like this is kind of foreshadowing what this career is going to be. When something happens on the news, like
rest of your life goes on hold, and
you've got to go.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, I wanted something more steady.
Yeah.
Right. And so at the same time, my roommate at the time in college, who I also went to high school with, he was a year ahead of me. He was in the TCOM program. So we were at Ball State, and he said, he's like, I'm going to teach you HTML. I'm like, all right. I'd only been on the internet for like 3 months at that point, right? I didn't have a computer growing.
Yeah.
And so I just jumped right into internet browsing, to coding websites, right off the bat.
Yep.
And so from there, learned Photoshop. From there, learned InDesign, Illustrator. Started getting freelance gigs. And the reason I ended up changing my major from TCOM to journalism graphics in the middle of my sophomore year, which set me back a year. So I was there for 5 years.
Okay.
But at the time, there weren't digital design classes. Yeah. There weren't web design classes. Yeah. So everything's kind of self-taught. And so I just aligned myself with what I thought was the best aligned with what I wanted to do, which was graphics. So it's, information hierarchy, typography, page layout.
Yep.
They were teaching us predominantly for newspapers. And at that time, even newspapers, everybody's like, oh, I hear newspapers are going to go away, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like this talk, this chatter. I just applied all of that knowledge to web.
Yeah, and HTML was pretty easy to learn. I remember I had, still to this day, the thickest book I ever owned was an HTML guide. I think it took up like half a bookshelf on its own. But it was pretty much, you read, what was in the manual and you did it. The websites weren't very attractive at the time, but it was pretty easy to program in that way.
Right.
And I was the same way. I had not a lot of background in it and just decided, seems like this is where stuff is going. I want to try this out.
Yeah, and it was a continual learning process. Like I said, for me, there was no formal training, at least during my Ball State years. And it was just kind of trial by error.
Yeah.
And I was just getting some freelance jobs. I got an on-campus job. And you just keep getting better. And I was getting sort of creative fulfillment. Even though I was doing all of it. You're doing the coding. You're doing the layouts in Photoshop. And my fulfillment was that final piece. And you start building your portfolio. And that's what was keeping me motivated.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I enjoyed about it, I don't know if this was true in your experience, is if there was an error, unlike the print world where if there's an error, it's kind of terminal. It's out there and there's not much you can do about it unless you reprint it. Whereas with the web, you see something wrong, you fix it, and there's a lot of satisfaction in saying, oh, that's now better, and maybe not a lot of people know about it.
There's no commitment. You can always change it. What the challenge is, it was correct so long as you were looking in the browsers that it was rendering correctly in. Because it might look good in this browser, but you pull up Internet Explorer and it's a mess. It was challenging. The challenge was learning all of those little bits of code that work over here, but you have to hack it to work over here. And I always thought that was fun. Yeah.
So you're doing that sort of learning as you go. What do you do then in terms of your next move after Ball State? Where do you go from there?
So after Ball State, it was funny. We were it was my second senior year, my fifth year, and they had the journalism building was, 2 years old at that time, and they had a big open house, and so my parents came down, and when we were there, they were there touring the building with me. And one of my professors came up, met my parents, we were having small talk, and they said, oh, I thought of you. There's this digital design program, study abroad in Denmark, and we think you'd be good to do it. You should really look into it. I'm like, oh, okay. We step outside the building. My parents are like, you're doing this. You're going.
So they were more enthusiastic about it than you were.
Yeah, I was like, they're not really into travel. Yeah. My mom's never been on a plane to this day.
Really?
And so they're shipping me off to Europe now.
Oh, wow.
To learn digital design.
So why were they so enthusiastic? Was it just they saw an opportunity for you, or did they want to get rid of you for a few months?
No, I don't think it was. I think it was the opportunity. For me, having kids now, you always want them to do better.
Sure, I would do the same for my son. Right? I would say, run, don't walk. Go take advantage.
Right,
of that.
And I think they put it in high regard that it was a professor at a university who said, you should really do this. They're like, all right, you're not done yet.
Yeah,
you're going to go 5.5 years now.
Yeah.
So. Went off to Europe, went to Denmark.
And you had never been to that part of the world before?
No, and even now, other than going on my honeymoon and,
Yeah.
and things like that. That's
Sure.
the most. That's the only time I've been to Europe. But I was
Okay.
able to go to Denmark, Sweden, and Finland. I was
wow.
there for about 2.5 months.
Yeah.
And that was the first formal training in web. So we sit down, and the guy gets up there and he starts like doing HTML. I'm like, oh, I know that.
Yeah.
I've never. It was the first time I'd ever had any formal training. It was
Oh,
great.
wow. Okay. So you're there for a few months then, and then what's next?
After that, it was funny because since I had walked, I had done the graduation ceremony and everything, but this was still counting toward a credit somehow. It's been a long time. I can't remember. But at the same time, while I was there, I'm looking for jobs. I'm searching and trying to land something for when I get back. And so I got back and I still didn't have anything. So I moved back in with them, and I was there with them for about another 2 months. I got back in August, and it wasn't until October that I got my first job offer.
Okay. And where do you work? What's your first job out of college?
So my first job out of college, I moved back to Muncie, and I was working at this, it was a print shop, but they also offered graphic design services and web design services. So I was their web designer.
Okay.
So when somebody came in for a brochure or a folder or billboards, they did all kind of graphic design things. They would upsell them on a website.
All right.
So I was managing all these different websites, designing different things for different companies every day, which was really exciting because it was always something new to work on.
Sure.
I've never been in an agency like Asher, right?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't consider them an agency, but it was a really great way to just work with different people, understand their businesses, and design a website, publish a website that matched whatever their business needs were.
Yeah, I think there's obviously advantages both ways. One of the things I've liked about working here the last 17 years is if something gets tedious, either because it's difficult and I can't move the rock up the hill any faster, or if it's just something I've been working on for a long time, turn to the right and there's something completely different. It sounds like the same thing there.
Well, that's the advantage of working in an agency, right? The disadvantage is at some point you run out of billable hours for that client, and you're like, man, there's so much other things I would want to keep doing on this website. In that case, and you kind of just had to stop.
Yeah.
Whereas when you work for a brand, a single brand, like you just keep working at it and you keep learning and you apply those right. Yeah. So it's a trade-off.
Yeah. So the first job, you're in Muncie working at the print shop doing website design. Where do you go next, and why do you make that change?
Yeah, I would say both from a professional and a personal social standpoint. So living in Muncie as a professional is much different than living in Muncie as a student, right? And so I got back down there and just kept on doing the same things that students did. That was what you knew, and that was the life. And I was still working, and I had freelance gigs, and I was, again, just trying to build my portfolio and get as much experience under my belt as possible. And during that time, I was building the portfolio pretty quick.
Yeah.
But, it was a small company, and I knew I wanted to do something else at some point, and probably in a different city. And so there was a coworker of mine who's still a friend now. He was also looking for other work, but he was really actively looking.
Yeah.
He was scouring resumes and whatever the job sites were at the time. And so he comes in one day to me and he's like, "Hey, I found this job when I was looking for him." And he said, I'm not qualified, but maybe you're interested in it. And it was for a web designer position at Vera Bradley.
Okay.
And I'm thinking, I don't even know. What's Vera?
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what did you know?
That was a law firm or something. I had no idea. Obviously, it's not my demographic.
Yeah, sure.
And I hadn't been in Fort Wayne, and they weren't as big as they were now.
Sure.
So I had no clue.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I've never been to Fort Wayne. Like, sure, I'll try it out.
Yeah.
So I go up and I did an interview, and ended up getting a job at Vera Bradley. And the company back then was very different than it is now.
So was it privately held at that time?
It's privately held.
Yeah.
Lot less people. Their sales model was through independent retail stores.
Okay.
They were not direct to consumer at all at that point. But the reason they were hiring for my position is because it was part of their growth strategy to go direct to consumer, including the launch of their first ever direct-to-consumer e-commerce website.
Oh, wow.
So they needed somebody who had web experience to manage all the emails, to build the website, build the shopping cart and checkout experience. And that's not just that was working with a team of developers, external partners to get that done.
Sure, but that's a pretty big leap. I mean, you're working for what sounds like a small print shop, and now you're working for this company that has aspirations to sell its products probably around the world. Was that intimidating? Did you have, any challenges going into it?
Not for me. For me, it was the next logical step.
Okay.
And it wasn't so much that I had never worked on an e-commerce site before and I'd never built a checkout.
Yeah.
I built websites that were easy to use. Like my whole thing was around usability and user experience, like getting from point A to point B with as few clicks as possible, get clean navigations, all of that stuff. And I think at the time, my resume, my portfolio had a lot of examples in that.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I landed the job.
Yeah, well, that's a pretty good place to start, is make it easy on the user. And as it turns out in 2021, that's a pretty good strategy.
Right.
So you're at Vera for how long? And then where do you go from there?
So I was at Vera for, 14 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I stayed there until 2019. And it was that time that my career, personal life, everything evolved the most, right? And so started out as a web designer by myself with my manager at the time. 2 years later, started building a team. And then that team just kept growing.
Yep.
Through that time, the company went public. We were really into retail at that point, started opening up stores, and the website just keeps getting bigger. So that means Black Friday, Cyber Monday starts becoming a thing for us. And it's like, oh my gosh, all of a sudden overnight, we're this big retail brand, right?
Yeah.
And so at some point, probably around 2015, I was approached to be with the position of director of marketing, which took me out of the web world. I was still a little involved in it, but certainly took me out of any hands-on creative that I was doing. So it's interesting. It's something you really have to think about, like, man, this is what I went to school for. Like, I did all this stuff and freelance work and building my portfolio, and now it's like, I'm not even doing creative anymore. Something going to be missing.
Sure.
But it was an interesting challenge because I think, I firmly believe that you have to have a mix of art and science. And so, this director of marketing role was more on the strategy side. And that works hand in hand with the visual and the design. So, that was just giving me the opportunity to look at all of our projects and initiatives from a strategic standpoint while still working with a really good team of designers. It's not like I was completely isolated from that. We all work together. So at that point, and even earlier on when I first start building my team, it's important you start delegating stuff to them. You can't keep everything on your own.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'd already started getting used to handing stuff off to people, and they do really good work, and you kind of live vicariously through that. Because you were part of that process.
Well, and ideally, you're having more influence because you're able to direct projects that are going to have an impact on 8 team members instead of just doing the work where you kind of the only person who gets to do the work. At least that's how I justify things when I delegate, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my first manager at Vera, he said something that I didn't understand at the time, and I didn't understand it because I wasn't a manager. I was still young in my career. I started there at 25 years old, right? So whatever level of maturity 25-year-old guys have, that's where I was, and I was still learning. But he said, you always want to hire people who are smarter than you. And I never understood that at the time because in my mind, I'm like, well, if I hire somebody smarter than me, that's putting me in a position or a risk of, I'm going to be let go or whatever. But you are only as good as your team.
That's right. Yeah.
Right? And so you have to have people who are better than you, who will challenge you more and make everybody stronger as a unit.
100%.
Because if you hire people who are, only as smart as you or lower, that's only you've hit your ceiling now. These people are going to challenge you to get better.
Yeah, it's good for your ego, but it's not good for your career long term. And that's one of the things that I say I do here is I assemble a really smart team and stay out of their way. And there's a lot of truth in that, and I think that is. It's a shift in your career where I think you say, hey, I'm as interested in helping other people learn and grow as I am in my own growth. That's, a different facet, and it sounds like you got there during those 14 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where do you go after Vera, and what happens next?
So after Vera, I left there. My position was eliminated during a reorg. Which was fine. Yeah. And one of the things that...
Well, I remember, if you don't mind me interjecting for a second, I remember you posted pretty eloquently, because what I find is people are either, they're either silent when that happens, or you can see the bitterness in anything they share. With you, it was very magnanimous. It was, hey, this was a great experience, no hard feelings. And I was like, oh, he really means that. This is, he's being honest and he's being positive. There's a lot to be learned from that.
It was honest and it was positive, and I don't mind talking about it because it's one of those things where something that you fear the most happening in your career, when it ends up happening, sometimes it becomes the best thing that could happen.
Yeah.
And I was with the company for a really long time. And I needed to change. And even when I was there, I knew I wanted to do something else. But it's like it's like after being there for so long, how do you even start? You get in that, this is all I know.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to learn everything new. Like just starting a new place and having them have to tell you where the bathrooms are.
Yeah.
Where do I get an eraser?
Yeah.
When can I take lunch?
What if they don't like me? Yeah.
Just learning all those things, like if my lunch is an hour and 5 minutes, am I going to get written up? Like you have a sense of comfort and just, where you work now. And so it ended up being, really positive for me. I had been through many of those reorgs before. And so, by the time it happened, for me, I kind of knew what happens ahead of a reorg. And I knew a reorg was coming up, but I didn't know anything about it. I'm like, normally I'm filled in on this kind of stuff. So there was some clues for me.
Sure.
And, when by the time it happened, I had already been thinking about it for 2 months. And so I went through all the stages of whatever.
Yeah.
And by the time it happened, and they call me in to have that discussion with me, I was like, all right, let's go, because I've got, I just want to move on to the next thing now. But, when I wrote the post, and I wanted to announce it. I mean, this is a major thing in my career, and I didn't want to hide behind it.
Sure.
But the company was great. If it wasn't great, I wouldn't have stayed there for 14 years, right? Anybody's going to get burned out after, anywhere they are after that long. But everything happened when I was there. I got married, bought a house, started a family, bought a second house. How many vehicles did we lease during that time? We were able to go on vacations. Learned a lot there, had some great leaders, worked with a lot of great people. A lot of them I still talk to today. I learned a lot from those people, even the ones I hired. How can I say anything bad about that?
Yeah, for sure.
Right? So at that point, I just, I'm kind of open like that, and I just wanted to acknowledge what happened. I wanted everybody to know that this is the change in my career now. And for me, it provided some closure after that long being somewhere.
Sure.
And now it was time to focus on the next thing.
Yeah. So what is the next thing? Where do you go from there?
So let's see. Just thinking back, and that was only 2.5 years ago.
Yeah.
So, I posted about it. I let everybody know that I was, of what was happening with my role. And I think that was on a Thursday night. And on Friday, I already had emails coming in of people who, saw that on LinkedIn and said, hey, I'd love to talk to you. So there were some other companies in town. By Monday, I was meeting people for lunch and kind of just starting to network. And it was kind of, this happened right before Memorial Day in 2019. And I had like the best June that I've had since a high school summer. It was great. Spent time with my kids, just, hung out around the house. We just did stuff, You're
going to take some time off. That's a pretty good time to take time off.
Enjoying the sun. Yeah, it was great. And, but at the same time, I get a little nervous if for me, and a little anxious if I don't know what's coming next, especially with my career. So I didn't want to just waste away my severance period and all of that and wait till the very end and then start worrying about it. I'm like, I need to start worrying about it right now. I just want something lined up. And so one of my former colleagues from Vera, I wouldn't say he was a colleague, but we didn't work on the same team. He was the CEO at Matilda Jane at the time. And so he reached out to me. We started having conversations. It was between Matilda Jane and another similar sized company in town. And it ended up working better for me to accept the offer from Matilda Jane. So I started working there right after July 4th. So I was only off for like 6 weeks or so.
Yeah.
So started working at Matilda Jane, and they were it was great because they were doing marketing like we were doing marketing. They're not a retail company; they have a different business model, but they were doing a lot of the same things. Yeah. And I also had the opportunity to start building and nurturing a creative marketing team, which was great. Takes me right back to my roots.
Yep.
Their team wasn't as big as Vera, so I was back in doing some emails and going back to my roots and pulling out some of those skills, and it was great. What I quickly realized is that the same stuff that was burning me out at Vera for that long, Matilda Jane, this is nothing bad about them, but they had some of those same attributes just based on the kind of company that they are. Like it's retail, it's selling product.
Yeah.
I thought it would be a really easy transition because as far as them both being brands that are very colorful, all about self-expression, all about capturing the emotion of women and little girls and all that. I'm like, this is going to be smooth, right? But it was burning me out, and I feel I'm very honest about feeling very bad about that because I was at Vera for 14 years. I was at Matilda Jane for about 3 months.
Yeah, well, sometimes you don't know until you're actually in it.
You don't know, and I felt like I did them a disservice. My goal was not to go in anywhere. My goal is to, where am I going to spend the next 14 years? That's my goal.
Sure.
But what had happened is when I was there, Howard Bailey reached out to me. Yeah. And this is the second time they had reached out to me. The first time they reached out to me, I was still at Vera Bradley.
Okay.
And we had done some interviews, and at that time, we just weren't in the same, we just weren't in the same space.
Yeah.
So they had reached out to me when I was at Matilda Jane. We were so busy at Matilda Jane. There was so much going on. They had a new website they were trying to launch, and it was a little behind. There was some other business things going on. Had a lot of meetings. And at first, when Howard Bailey was contacting me, I was like, it was almost like they were bothering me because I had so much to do, and I had already been through there before. So I'm like, why are they contacting me again? I'm gonna go through interviews, and then nothing's gonna happen. But I was like, all right, I'll do the interview. And I've already told Howard Bailey this. I'm like, man, I'm lucky I have this job. Yeah. Because if it was me, I wouldn't have hired me. Because when I went to that interview, I didn't need a job. Like I had just started at Matilda Jane and I was just getting immersed there. Yeah. And like I'm team Matilda Jane right now, or I'm team wherever I'm working. And now I've got somebody else coming in. I'm like, man, I don't have time for this. I got to go back and figure out this website or whatever it is.
So why did you say yes to the interview if that's what was in your mind?
Well, they were pretty persistent.
Okay.
I went to the first interview and I didn't prepare for it. None of that. And it was a great conversation, but we left the interview. I'm like, all right, well,
one of the reasons it probably went well is you were pretty, nothing to lose.
I didn't have anything to lose. And so I didn't put a lot of pressure on myself. I didn't do a lot of research. And I left that interview, and in my mind, I was like, well, I didn't do a good job. They're not going to call me anymore. Great. Let me get back over here because I've got this meeting I got to get to in like 10 minutes. Like 2 days later, I'm getting an email again. I'm like, what? What happened? I thought I blew this thing.
What do I have to do to lose this?
Right, exactly. Like an idiot, right? And then, and so all right, they wanted to set up a second interview. So I set up a second interview. And I forgot what the timing was, but, the second interview was the next week. And I get in back at work on Monday and at Matilda Jane, something happened. I'm like, I don't have time for this interview. Like, I wasn't really confident. I called them up and I emailed them and I said, I'm going to withdraw my application. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'm going to withdraw. They wrote back. Casey wrote back. He's the founder of the company. He said, I understand. Can you please just come in for one discussion? If you decide it's not right for you, that's fine. All right.
Yeah.
So in between that and me going in there, finally something hit me. Like, hey, idiot, this is your ticket out of retail and product marketing. And again, nothing wrong with retail and product marketing, but I've been doing it for a long time. It might not be for me anymore. I get bored. I want to do something different. So finally, I had the realization, like, go do the interview. It's like you have the devil and the whatever angel on your shoulder. They were fighting. They're like, go do the interview. Yeah. So I went and did the interview. I feel like I had a better positive approach to it. thankfully they were patient enough with me during that whole, scenario, and wasn't just like, this guy's not interested, forget it.
Yeah.
And they made me an offer in that interview.
Oh, wow.
Right there.
Wow.
So, which was great. So I thought about it, and probably the next day I accepted the offer and started there like 2 weeks later.
All right. So tell us about Howard Bailey Financial. How do you describe the organization? It's a financial advisory practice, is that correct?
Yes, with a focus on retirement planning strategies.
Okay. And how many people at the practice, and what do all those folks do?
Sure. So we have about 30 people over 2 locations. We have 3 people up in Mishawaka. Okay. We have a satellite office there. And our home office, we have, in the high 20s or, right around 30 people. So we have a team of financial advisors. They have service advisors who support them. Mm-hmm. We have a marketing staff, and operations staff, and also a front office staff.
Okay. So you mentioned that Casey is the founder. Where's the name come from?
Howard Bailey?
Yes.
That name comes from his 2 grandfathers.
Ah, okay. I always thought there was a guy, kind of like you thought there was a person named Vera Bradley and it was a law firm. I thought there was a person named Howard Bailey.
No, it's Howard Weed and Ralph Bailey. And what's interesting is Vera Bradley had the same thing.
Yeah.
People are like, oh, what does Vera do? Vera Bradley was a real person.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get Howard as well.
Okay.
So who's Howard?
Yeah.
And it's 2 people.
Yeah, there are people who in the past have called and asked to speak to Mr. Asher, and that's when they know nothing about us.
So, sales call.
That's right. So your area, the area that you have an operations role, you also have a marketing role. How many people on your team?
On my team is about 8 people between the 2 groups. So I manage the marketing team as well as our front office team. We call them the first impressions team.
Okay.
Because they're responsible for fielding all the phone calls and greeting people when they come in. We place a high emphasis on experience, client experience, and just anybody who's coming in who's not a client yet. They're in charge of making that experience world-class. Yeah,
so it sounds like there's some things you learned in the retail world that you're applying here to customer service.
Absolutely. There's a huge, and my background obviously is not in customer service. Mm-hmm. My background is in usability, user experience, and this is just a physical, extension of that. And as far as how that relates to Vera Bradley, they were really big on, if you're a customer and you come into the store, how you're greeted, how you're shown around the store, how you're being offered assistance in finding what you're looking for and what you need. A lot of that ties into what our front office first impressions team does.
Yeah, and you've mentioned before we hit record that the founder of the company is pretty marketing savvy himself.
Absolutely.
Correct? And I would assume that's a good thing, that helps you in your work.
It does. I mean, he's a great collaborator. I meet with him every week. He's busy doing a lot of other things, and he really spearheads a lot of the financial marketing that we do. So we have a TV show, radio show, a podcast, and we're starting to get really heavy into YouTube videos, videos produced just for YouTube. Yeah. He's coming up with all the content. I don't know financial.
Sure.
That's one of the things I told them coming in. I'm like, I came from patterns and whimsical stuff. How am I going to fit in with content? He's got all the content.
Yeah, and it's a heavy regulated industry, so there's things you can't do that you probably were able to do in other places.
That was a big learning curve for me coming in. Yeah. We're regulated through the SEC. Yeah. And depending on how big you are and how fast you grow, you can get audited by the SEC. You have to turn over marketing material and all this. That doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong.
Sure.
It's just a check and a balance to make sure you're in compliance.
But it makes your lead time longer because there's another step in the process where somebody has to check the work.
Right. And we do have a compliance officer who, if I'm in doubt on anything, I mean, just to be safe, send everything to the compliance officer. He does all the proofing on that stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So you're producing a lot of content, and it is a service. So how do you make that interesting? How do you make something that, some people might say, well, it's financial services, how interesting can it be? How do you bring that to life?
That's an interesting question, and I think that's one of the things, again, when I was coming into this industry, how does that fit me? Mm-hmm. How does that fit me? Because I'm coming from places that have hundreds and thousands of followers on Instagram, and we're a very visual self-expression brand. Yeah. Coming over here, I think at the time I started, they had 100 on Instagram, And that's just not what our clients do. Now, there's an opportunity for that, and I think that's what we're going to be doing in terms of brand building and some of our future plans. But really, what our goals are one of our goals is, one of our core values is helping people. We want to help as many people as possible, and that translates into client acquisition.
Yeah.
So for me, it was just a learning opportunity to do different sources of lead generation that I've not done in my past. It's very different from retail marketing.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So what are some of the things you're spending? You mentioned content creation, of course. What are some of the other things that are on your mind, on your plate, keeping you up at night, making you excited, all those things?
Yeah, I try not to make anything keep me up at night. I think that's been one of the big benefits of where I am now in terms of work-life balance.
Yeah.
If I was still in retail as we record this podcast, I'd be up at night because Black Friday's coming up, and that just consumes...
Having nightmares about the website crashing.
Yeah, it just consumes your Q4. Yeah. And fortunately, in my new role, Black Friday's not a huge thing in retirement.
Sure.
But yeah, it's different. We're working on events and... again, YouTube. I think there's a huge opportunity for us. The vision of our company is helping people. That leads to growth. They've had, even I can't take credit for this. They were already on a growth trajectory when I came in. Yeah. Part of my role is to keep that growth trajectory consistent and growing. Right after I started was when COVID hit. Yeah. So, we had to deal with that. But, we're looking at expanding into new markets. We're already in Mishawaka. So what's the next Mishawaka? Getting really consistent about internally produced YouTube video that delivers value about various financial and retirement planning topics. I'm really excited. We continue to grow my team. Yep. That's been one of the most fun aspects of my role.
Yeah, and that seems unusual, and I mean that as a positive. I've bumped up against a lot of financial advisory practices. There's one that I met with recently, and they were talking about getting some outside help, something they'd never done. And as it turns out, they're like, well, Asher's too big for us. We just need, someone part-time. There's other folks I hear from who the person who's doing marketing is also not just managing the front of the house, but is the front of the house. And when you have some extra time, post on social media. It's an afterthought for a lot of practices, but for Howard Bailey, it seems like it is one of the largest areas. Why is that? Why do you look at it differently, and why do they make those investments?
Yeah, marketing for Howard Bailey is on the forefront, and I would attribute that to be because Casey was that person who was doing it all himself. Yep. He was running appointments. Sometimes these were mobile appointments, him going to people's houses and meeting. Doing the marketing. Yeah. He was his own compliance officer. Yeah. Doing the TV show and the radio. And those are things when you have a hour-long radio show every week and a 30-minute TV show, that consumes a lot of your time.
You
a lot of his
with
time
clients.
With clients or just doing other things. And eventually, again, like us all, like I did, and where I was, you just start to get burned out on that stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
And so they had when I entered the organization, they had a marketing coordinator who was really good, just like a workhorse. She's great, and she's a really strong copywriter, and she really gets his voice, so she can help out with kind of doing some scripts for him and helping him out on that front. But really, she was doing everything, and you're just getting the tasks done, and she really didn't have time to think strategically about stuff. So that's where my role comes into play. If we want to open new locations, or if whatever it is that we want to do, that we're thinking about it from a strategy standpoint. We're not just jumping in and moving things around and saying, all right, how do we do this? Like, let's have a plan.
You know why you're doing what you're doing instead of just checking off the to-do list.
And we have goals, and it's run like a project. Yeah. Small organizations, and I say small because compared to what I'm used to working in, it's a small organization. But our organization, as compared to other financial institutions, is a pretty good size.
Oh yeah, sure.
But for me, that's why I refer to it as small. But where I am now, one of the huge benefits is, I report directly in to Casey. And so anything that we want to do, we don't have to go through a whole committee of approvals. We just go and do it. Yeah. We do a lot of testing and a lot of learning. If it doesn't work, we modify it or we don't do it again. And what does work, we just keep making it better.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's one of the advantages of being smaller is you can pivot on a dime and try stuff. And in today's environment, if it doesn't work, try something else.
That was so refreshing for me coming in.
Yeah.
That was really one of the motivators for me. It's like, all right, what am I going to work on today?
Yeah.
And especially during COVID. I think everybody was trying to figure it out during COVID. It certainly impacted our business model and how we were networking with clients, bringing in new leads and all of that. The timing for me couldn't have been better because I had just started and I didn't know any different anyway. Like I was still learning the business. And so, hey, well, throw COVID in there and
it's just another speed bump. Yeah.
And then now is any time, this is better than any other time. Let's just do it now.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's talk about the speed round of the show, if you will, where we synthesize some of the things we talked about. You've been really transparent about your career path, which I appreciate. What's the one best piece of advice you think you've learned about building a successful career that you think is worth sharing?
The one thing I would say is I would encourage everybody to do something outside of their day-to-day job that brings them some level of fulfillment or inspiration. And for me, thinking back to when I was doing more creative and design work, I always had some kind of a side project going. And that side project doesn't have to be a side hustle that's making you money. It could just be something that you're doing because it's creatively fulfilling for you. So when you're working, again, this is through the lens of a creative or a graphic designer or whatever. Whenever you're working for an agency or a brand or whatever, like you can do what you want to do, but you have to work within the constraints of that brand.
For sure.
So I encourage everybody to do something where you have your own brand, not big brand, but you make the final call. And you keep working on it until you're creatively fulfilled, and then you could put it out there for everybody to see.
Yeah.
So I was doing freelance work. I would make up projects for myself.
Yeah.
I just do stuff on the side just because I was inspired by something or whatever. That's where this holiday mixtape comes in. And that's important because for me, it's not only putting 20 Christmas songs on a CD, I get to design an album cover every year.
Yeah.
And there's something fulfilling to me about that. All right, how's this one going to look different than the last one?
Well, in my experience is when you do that, a lot of times you learn things that help you in the other areas of your life. I mean, it's a cliche, but some of my best ideas, not that I have very many good ideas, but some of my best ideas are when I'm going for a run or going for a walk. And the problem that's been churning for sometimes weeks, all of a sudden I have a solution when I stop thinking about it.
Right. That's exactly right. There was something I was going to say about that. Now I can't.
Well, you have to go do something else, and then it'll come back to you.
I know what it is. It was really important for me as my career began to transition out of the creative role and into more of a strategy role. It's like, I'll make that transition in my career, but you can never take that creative, what I see, my vision, like that's me. I'm always going to have that. And it's very true that if you don't use it, you lose it.
Yeah, for sure.
So I was just looking at a Photoshop file today that a freelancer sent over to us. And one of the people on my team was trying to figure out how to isolate something. And there it was created in artboards. And we came across something. I'm like, shoot, I don't know how to do that. This is the new way that the new generation, because I'm getting older, is setting up their files.
Yeah.
I have no clue.
Yeah.
So even now I have to go back and try to learn. I'm like, well, there's Google. Let's Google that and see how we can fix that.
For sure. But at least you have the baseline understanding, you know where to start.
Right.
So, yeah.
But whatever it is, it doesn't have to be a creative thing. If volunteering and giving back or working for some philanthropy or just doing some pro bono marketing services or just providing some consulting on the side to somebody, just like keep your gears going because as great as brands are, as great as your employer is, there's always, like for me, there was always something more that I wanted to do where I was able to own it. I didn't have to get it approved through somebody. It achieved my vision at the end of the day. I just kept working on it until it achieved that vision. You always have to have something that you own completely.
Yeah, so don't be one-dimensional. That's really good advice. All right. If you were going to define what makes Howard Bailey different, how would you describe it to someone concisely if they said, why you and not someone else?
So for me, going in, interviewing there, and at first being very reluctant about it, One of the things I noticed very quickly is that Howard Bailey was very different and stood apart as compared to other financial institutions that I had either visited or done business with. There is a completely different vibe at Howard Bailey. So when I first moved to Fort Wayne, you got to move all your stuff. You got to move your bank and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I opened up a bank account and then started getting some savings and, okay, let's figure out how to invest this. And so I went to the same bank, which is a chain.
Yeah.
Went to the same bank and, all right, what can you do? What can we, from a financial planning investment standpoint? So they hooked me up with this advisor who was based at that bank. Opened up a Roth IRA or something like that. All right, we'll meet in a year. Great. A year comes, somebody else calls me. Hey, my name is so-and-so. I just wanted to let you know that your previous advisor is no longer, but I'm going to be working with you. Can you come in and we could catch up? Sure. I come in, very nice person, but she had a very different strategy than the first guy.
Yeah.
We should take this out of the Roth and we should do this and you should put more money. I'm like, I don't know. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's do that. Great, we'll meet in a year. Third year, same thing. Another person calls me. By the fourth time that happened, I didn't even call back.
Yeah, so very transactional.
It was very transactional, number one. And number two, when I walk into those kinds of places, I'm not greeted the way I'm greeted when I walk into Howard Bailey. We have a greeting process. Whoever's behind the desk gets up, comes around the desk, greets you, offers you coffee, or a beverage, offers you a snack if we have them, walks you back to your conference room. Is there anything I could get for you? Make some small, how was your vacation? All of that. I never really received that where I was doing my banking. I was never invited to a client event.
Yeah.
I never received here's an update from the leader kind of newsletter. None of that, a Christmas card.
Yeah.
We really we strive to give a world-class experience, for both clients and people who are just curious about the company. And also the people who work there. It's a great team collaboration. So I remember when I was interviewing and I was looking at the staff pages on the website, and you see all those people's faces and you start to think, can I see myself working with them?
Yeah.
And you start to develop like, oh, this person's probably like that. Oh, he looks like he'd be whatever.
Yeah.
And looks can be deceiving. One of the first things we did after I got in, let's get all new photos in here because the lighting wasn't great. I'm like, you guys look a lot better than you do in your photos. So it's like lighten all of that up.
Yeah.
We're all about creating a really great experience, and that's something that I've never had from any financial institution.
Yeah, okay. All right, here's where I come back to the question that I thought the two of you are going to have to remember for me, but it turns out my 52-year-old mind is not as addled as I thought it was, so I remembered it. So the last question, this is a curveball, but you have... Maybe, Nick, we can move this one up if we need to, so it comes out right around the holidays, if that's not already the plan. You have 10 years of experience in putting together a holiday mix. What do you think is the best underappreciated holiday song or holiday album that you recommend?
Oh, my gosh.
Not one of the obvious ones, but dig a little deeper.
Man, do you know how many songs I go through every year? It's insane.
Yeah.
And I think that surprises a lot of people, and that's the motivation of the mix, right?
Yeah.
Because most people hear is what is on these radio stations that flip over November and December, just play the same stuff.
And it's Mariah Carey every other song.
Over and over.
Yeah.
My goal, and this is why it's so hard to pick one.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you this.
Yeah.
I tend to gravitate towards stuff that's like R&B and funk from like the 60s and 70s.
Right. So the Ray Charles Christmas album.
That's good.
Pretty good, yeah.
But a lot of people still know that. And that is a good front to back album.
Yes.
But why is it that you don't hear Ray Charles on these stations?
Yeah.
You do hear Mariah Carey. And that's great too. If that's what you like, that's fine. My goal is to find something, even if it's 40 years old, that somebody says, man, I had no idea that was out there. My goal is to take people who rightfully so may say, I hate Christmas music because they hear the same stuff. That's what they know is on the radio.
Yeah.
I make a Christmas mixtape for people who hate Christmas music.
Okay.
Listen to this.
All right.
Then get back with me and tell me what your favorite song was on this track.
All right. So that said, what do you recommend? What's one that you think people should listen to if they haven't given it a shot before? Could be an album, could be a song.
J.D. McPherson.
Oh, I love J.D. McPherson.
He's got an album called Socks that came out 2 years ago.
Okay.
And it's this real retro
Yeah.
vibe. But it's, Christmas music is, a lot of what they play on the radio is also stuff that's been around for decades.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really good new stuff coming out right
Yeah.
now. So from a full album standpoint,
Yeah.
I would say J.D. McPherson. But there are also Sharon Jones and the Dap Kings.
Okay.
She has a really great, soul Christmas album.
All right.
But what happens is, and again, I can make a whole podcast out of this alone, but what happens with these Christmas albums is a lot of times you have artists and record labels. The artist won't make a full album. They'll just put out a single.
Yeah.
Or maybe a and B side, or maybe this Christmas song's a B side on something else.
Yeah.
So it's not just about the album. Sometimes that's mostly what I have.
Okay.
Is finding all these 45s of...
It was a throwaway.
It was a throwaway.
Yeah.
But everybody was hoping. So here's what happens when it comes to like royalties and these artists getting paid off of music. What you want is you want your song to be the next All I Want for Christmas Is You. Why? Because they play that every single year. And every time they play that song, guess who's getting paid?
That's right. Yeah.
Right? So everybody tries to do something like that, something that's going to catch on but all the stations play the same things over and over. So my goal, even though I don't have a massive following, my goal is just to bring some joy to somebody somewhere through this album. Somebody will say, man, I never heard that song before, but I really love it.
All right. Well, that's great. So J.D. McPherson, Socks, Sharon Jones and the Dap
Kings.
Dap Kings. Okay, what's the name of that one?
That's the group, and the album is...
I put you on the spot. That was unfair.
It's fine. No, I could picture the album cover. It's her and the Dap Kings all in the front, and it's green. Is it? I'm not even gonna say. I'm gonna get it wrong.
That's fine. We can add it. We can add it to the show notes. Have you ever heard Nick Lowe's Christmas album?
I don't think that I have.
It's actually not bad. It's kind of mellow, and you know what? Surprisingly good. Chris Isaak's Christmas album.
Okay.
So
Nick Lowe, is it on vinyl?
It probably is.
Because one of my prerequisites. Is that, and that gets harder and harder every year. And it gets more expensive every year.
You know what's definitely on vinyl, and you probably have already heard it a million times, it might be mainstream for you, is Phil Spector's Christmas album.
Yeah.
Do you have that on vinyl?
Of course. I have the original one, and they reissued it for Record Store Day on some like color vinyl or something. Have you heard, I know you're a Rolling Stones fan,
yes,
the Keith Richards Run, Rudolph, Run.
No.
That was a B-side to a 45. So never on any album.
I'll have to look that up.
But that's a good track.
All right. Well, everyone, this has been the holiday special of the Asher Marketing Podcast, starring your favorite Santa Claus, Steve Salcedo. Stephen, thank you for being here with us.
I appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for being here with us, and thanks for everyone who took the opportunity to listen to this episode. We'll be back next time with another great guest, and we hope you'll join us then.